guest. Yeah, Hillary is our guest. Well, Hillary was an MSW student here. She's been part of our program. She graduated. She now works at the university and is also a marketing assistant for me, Hillary Kloss, MSW, LMSW. And she was co-host last year, co-hosted, I think, for 2 years. So it's good to have Hillary on the show. She's going to share with us her learning experience here in the School of Social Welfare. She's on? Or
yes.
Hillary?
Hello.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, we have a full studio here with Alyssa and Luke and Dion, another BSW student who's probably going to be our board operator. So we're really celebrating that.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm glad to be on the show and be a part of it.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk. We've been talking about, well, in the beginning, we talked about the Social Workers Radio talk show. And you were one of the first, really one of the first people to graduate from the program. So talk to us about what that experience did for you in terms of social work, because now you have a major position in an agency, social work, but the skills that you learned from co-hosting the show, from doing marketing, how does that fit in to your overall career, you know, what you're doing professionally?
Right. Well, it really fits into what I do. I'm a coordinator for a statewide survey for foster care youth. So not only did my clinical experience at the School of Social Work help with understanding foster care, experiences that youth go through, the way the foster care system's set up. But aside from that, in terms of managing the program, sharing it, promoting it to youth, to agency workers, to directors, being able to talk about the program comfortably and with a wide variety of audiences, that skill set really came from co-hosting on the show. When I first started with the Social Workers Radio talk show, my plan was actually to not be on the show. My plan was to just kind of sit behind the scenes and help kind of set it up to be successful without actually being on the show. But thanks to Kathryn and her encouragement,
I reeled you in. No chance that you were not going to be on the show.
I should have known better. But, being on the show, being able to co-host it, to speak with a wide variety of guests in different fields, not only in social work, but fields that I had zero experience in, and to still be able to ask them important questions and to kind of anticipate their perspectives in relating their topic to social work has absolutely helped me in what I do, because I'm now able to talk in front of groups of people, no matter who the audience is, and still be able to gauge their interest in the work that I'm doing and to see how they can connect the dots between their field and the work that I do.
Yeah. Do you talk about this amongst your peers, your experience as a co-host, being able to talk about these issues, social work, and also from a different perspective? I think it's a non-traditional way of viewing social work. And you've had that kind of experience. Do you compare yourself to maybe some, I don't want to say your coworkers, but to other social workers, because you're all over the place, that you have a real advantage, do you think, in terms of your ability to, like you say, you're in macro sociology, you do a lot of public speaking and talking, that it is? Yeah.
I would say that it is an advantage, and granted, my background was in macro social work, so I was heading in this direction anyway. But still being able to understand an entirely different form of media and a different form of getting social work out there. Aside from, I do a lot of web development and a lot of website social media outreach, but to pull radio into that and to say I have experience in that I've seen a board op, that I've been on a show, that I've been in, the background work required to launch a show, that is certainly almost a wild card when I'm talking to people. When I say, oh, and I've also co-hosted a radio show, you see their eyes light up and they're like, whoa, like you're a social worker, but you've been on the radio? And that opens a lot of different conversations about where social work is going, how social work is now adapting to different fields, to technology, to the internet, to radio, to media. So it's, in my experience, when I'm talking about the Social Workers Radio talk show and I'm talking about my work and my background, it's great to be able to see the people that I'm talking to expand their horizons about social work. So they no longer think that social workers sit in a room with a client and that's all they do. You know, their eyes are opening to all the different possibilities that social work can be a part of.
Now, Hillary, you said you were a macro focus, but for someone who's a micro, student or interested in micro, how did the work tie in that you were doing here? I mean, with the guests that you were interviewing, you're learning about them, you're communicating, you're talking about topics maybe in regards to counseling and empowering and advocacy. How did that tie in for you to get you that micro experience when you had the macro focus?
Right. No, that's a great question. When I'm talking to guests, particularly the ones who have written autobiographies or memoirs about their own trauma or their own experience, being on the show forced me to shed my macro comfort and really get into talking about their experiences, about coping, about the trauma, about where they are today, while also keeping in mind that we're live on the radio, that there are listeners out there listening to what we're sharing, and as much as in clinical work, your conversations are confidential, that's clearly not the case in radio. So speaking with those kinds of guests who are talking about their own experiences, their own trauma, their own abuse, and, where they've come since then, allowed me to ease into that and to also feel comfortable having those kind of conversations. When I talk to my classmates who are clinical, I am extremely envious of social workers who love the clinical work, who are able to just sit with clients and really get into that. And my focus, my brain just that's not where it goes to first. I'm thinking about policies and I'm thinking about organizational structure and research, but to be able to gain experience in clinical social work with guests who are comfortable sharing their story certainly, allowed me to meet in the middle almost of gaining clinical experience while still kind of being in a macro environment. So I think, not only those guests who are sharing their own memoirs, but the guests who are experts in, certain fields or in certain techniques in social work, who, CBT or who are, leading research in other areas, and then can compare that to actually applying that with guests, with clients, with groups of people. So that it certainly expanded my horizons in clinical social work and allowed me an opportunity to dip my toes into clinical work without, being in a situation where I'm liable and responsible for someone's well-being.
Hillary, I just had an opportunity. I couldn't go a couple weeks ago because I had so many other things to do, but to a seminar where a clinical social worker, it was a lecture, and I think this is an emerging trend where he does therapy or does counseling online. And does it Skyping, for instance. And I know that is an emerging trend. And of course, I'm getting a look both from Alyssa and Dion, but usually this kind of like, and even Luke turned around. So, but I'm going to bring it up because it is kind of an emerging trend. And of course, if you've had experience doing radio, it kind of, it's allied or it's closely related to that. So what do you think about that, doing therapy online? Should I use the word therapy or counseling or?
I would say both. I mean, you can do clinical work via the internet and via technology. A lot of my research, now that I'm in the position I'm in, is about using social media and using telecommunication, things like Skype, things like video conferencing, in an ethical way and in a way that meets the needs of those that you're interacting with. So I think it's great. I mean, I think back to when, social work's been around forever. In some way, people have been seeking assistance from others. So I try to picture, when the telephone came out and people were probably all, oh my God, you can't talk to someone over the telephone. Who knows who's going to get that information? And, but the more you learn about that tool, the more you can see where your work fits into that. So a lot of my research has been about using Skype, video conferencing, using Facebook as a way for, doing clinical work, things that you would still do with a client. You'd still obtain consent to engage with them in a therapeutic way. You would still avoid any kind of disclosure concerns of releasing their information out there to sharing it with other people. You would still abide by confidentiality. Those things still apply online, but it's understanding the securities behind those tools you're using. So understanding the data risks associated with Skype, or the security risks associated with Facebook and the privacy settings and things like that. However, when you're kind of creating an agreement with a client to engage with them using that tool, those are things that you set forward to them. You say, I want you to know that if we do choose to communicate via Facebook, or if we do choose to create an online counseling session, understand that there are risks involved. And, if that client agrees to that, and if you set that forth in the beginning, as you would with any kind of traditional clinical relationship, I think that opens the doors to expanding all the different opportunities you have to interact with clients. I mean, think about clients who are in rural settings who can't afford to drive into the local city or the local town to have counseling sessions.
Or think about people who are sick. Think about people who are bedridden. Think about elderly people. I mean, you can go through a list of clients who really don't have access to counseling because they can't get there, or they don't have a car. I mean, you can, and so, you really could go on and on with that. And I just have one more thing, and Alyssa's going to say something, but you mentioned the telephone, because it I think that's a good example of how we tend to, we know what we know, but it's hard to move on and to make changes. But when the telephone, which was like turn of the century, I guess, when the masses of people had access to it, the criticism was that people are not going to be social anymore. If you use that telephone, then you're going to just isolate yourself and you won't be connecting with people in the way that people used to connect. Right. The opposite happened. It just was another addition to connecting, because it wasn't a substitute for connecting with people or having them in their home or going out. It was in addition to, so you were connecting with many, many more people.
Right, and people are making those arguments about social media and about the internet today as well, that the quality of their communication skills is going to decrease. Their social livelihood is going to decrease. When really all that's happening is that the form of communication is changing. So we're communicating in different ways. We're expressing ourselves differently, but it's still communication nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the counseling piece, as the clinical person, some red flags. I mean, I think it's good for, depending on the type of issue that you're dealing with. I mean, I'm one of the clinicians who focused a lot on body language, who focused a lot on that, that one-on-one setting where you're building that relationship in that type of environment that is supportive, I guess, toward more counseling. I would just think of what happened if a person is really upset. How do you reach out to them if they're not in the same room with you? If you see a red flag of something, a suicidal comment, or some type of, I'm just thinking of all the cases that I've worked with where I needed to be there physically, and sometimes I needed to call in another clinician to help de-escalate a situation. So I think it can be good.
How do you handle that?
I mean,
how does one?
I mean, usually the relationship I had already built, I was able to look at body set language to get those early cues to know, okay, we have to switch this conversation, or I need to get someone else in here, because I use body language a lot, or based on the conversation that they were saying to de-escalate. And then I usually had someone who was available to assist if needed, But if I'm, across the, not local or not in a place that's, where I can do that, it's sort of concerning. As a clinician, I'd be like, how do I reach out to this person if there is a crisis? If they are becoming more upset, how do I respond? But I think it depends on the type of counseling you're doing, and you have to know your client first. I wouldn't say start off with someone in an online counseling beforehand. I would have to know that client, build rapport, see sort of the mental state of that person, and then say, if you can't make these next sessions, maybe we can rotate every other week based on my evaluation and assessment of the person's mental health.
But we do that with crisis intervention. We have suicide crisis intervention. So we have people calling in who are potential suicide victims, and they will call in, and you talk them down, and you're doing that. So, I mean, that's a pretty...
Then there's always the follow-up afterwards. Usually the 911 person might be on their way to the house. There's something that there can be that person to step in if there's a crisis, or if need be. Whereas if, unless the person doing the online counseling has a person to call, maybe that's something they set up at first. Who can I call in case of an emergency? Who can I have like an emergency contact for you if I find that you're getting too upset? Who can I call that can get there within 5 minutes? So I think you just have to have the priorities and precautions, address those beforehand, just for your own comfort. As a clinician, I would be really uncomfortable if something was to happen and I couldn't get to my client right away, or I didn't know who am I supposed to call to respond to help this person.
Yeah, I mean, the parameters are different, like you said, and I think, Hillary, you said it also. You have to set up what the standard is for this kind of counseling or for this kind of therapy. And it's not a perfect situation, neither is the other, but so you have to do that. Hillary, you said you had to leave. I know you have other, I don't want to keep you. I know you said you wanted to be off by 9:30, so goodbye.
Well, thank you guys.
Did I get that email? I did get that email from you. I know you've got another appointment.
No, that's okay. I'm still thankful for the opportunity to be on the show. It's great to hear everything that's happening. I mean, to see where the show was in the very beginning, and now we're possibly having social work students run the board. I mean, the sky's the limit.
Dion Young. We're not going to let him get out. We're not letting him leave this room, by the way, because Luke has deserted us. Not really, but he looked. Well, he's been fantastic, actually.
Yeah. So thank you guys again for having me on, and I'm excited to see what's next.
Great. All right. We'll talk to you soon. We're going to take a short break right now. You're listening to the Social Workers Radio talk show on WCDB FM, University at Albany. I'm your social worker with a microphone. Don't go away because we have lots more to talk about.